Okay, so this is going to be a longer video, and you can see the whole video on my page with the TV app. You know what I'm talking about, the TubeTube. So go ahead and check out the full video there. But this is going to be a little bit longer video to make up for the couple of days that I was not able to read anything because I was sick. And again, I do apologize for that. We are going to start with, again, we're in the forward. We're going to start with number 3, the making of the Constitution and constitutional change. And from there, the next video will be going into the Constitution itself. In the mid-1780s, Americans who thought in national terms argued that the problems plaguing the Confederation required a revolution in government. They received the political process that between 1765 and 1776 had created the Revolutionary Movement. In 1785, at the Mount Vernon Congress, delegates from Virginia and Maryland settled boundary disputes and navigation rights. Virginia then proposed a convention to meet in Annapolis, Maryland in September of 1786 to solve national commercial problems. Only delegates from Virginia, New York, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey showed up at Annapolis, but they seized the chance to redefine the American political agenda. They proposed a new convention to meet in Philadelphia in 1787 to, quote, render the Constitution of government adequate to the exigencies of the Union, end quote. On February 21, 1787, the Confederation Congress endorsed this proposal, but its more limited resolution stressing revision of the Articles clashed with the Annapolis Mandate. Of the 74 delegates from 12 states, Rhode Island refusing, only 55 showed up at the convention at some point. Some of the greatest American politicians were not there. John Adams was American minister to Great Britain. Thomas Jefferson was American minister to France. John Jay was the Confederation Secretary for Foreign Affairs in New York. Patrick Henry stayed in Virginia because he was uninterested in national politics, although he later claimed, quote, I smell a rat, end quote. 5 kinds of delegates attended the convention. National heroes George Washington of Virginia and Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania brought prestige, guaranteeing that Americans would give the convention's proposals a fair hearing. Theorists of government, such as James Madison of Virginia, James Wilson of Pennsylvania, Alexander Hamilton of New York, brought ideas that the convention would use to frame its proposals. Elder statesmen such as John Dickinson of Delaware and Roger Sherman of Connecticut, brought their experience, one of 2 reality checks on the convention. Advocates of local interests such as William Patterson of New Jersey and Luther Martin of Maryland spoke for the state's concerns, the other reality check. Finally, most delegates, such as quiet men John Blair of Virginia and Jacob Broome of Delaware, became raw material for consensus and compromise. From May 25 through May 28, the delegates elected their president, George Washington, and their treasury, William Jackson of Georgia, and adopted the rules. From May 29, when Edmund Randolph of Virginia proposed the resolution known as the Virginia Plan, to June 14, the large state delegates prevailed on nearly every issue. The Virginia Plan outlined a national government with supreme legislative, executive, and judicial branches. On June 15, the small state delegates counterattacked, backing William Peterson, New Jersey's plan, which was nothing more than a reworking of the Articles of Confederation, giving Congress more power. On June 19th, the convention reaffirmed the Virginia Plan, but large delegates and small state delegates battled for weeks over representation in Congress. Small state delegates fought for equality of states in Congress. Large state delegates demanded representation based on population. This conflict lasted through July 16, when the convention adopted the Great or Connecticut Compromise. So the Great Compromise or Connecticut Compromise. From July 19 to July 26, the delegates pored over the plan, tinkering and adjusting, and then recessed for a week. During the recess, Randolph prepared the Constitution's first draft, drawing on Wilson's advice. The delegates reconvened on August 6th, and for the next 5 weeks, they tackled problems they had postponed, such as devising a method for choosing president and vice president. They also adopted compromises to appease the slave states. From 10 September to 12 September, the Committee on Style and Arrangement drew up the Constitution's final draft, assigning this task to Governor Morris of Pennsylvania. From 12 September to 17 September, the delegates moved through the last state of revision. On September 17, 1787, 37 of the 40 delegates present voted to adopt and sign the Constitution and send it to the Confederation Congress. No group at the convention got its way, especially not the theorists of government. Senior statesmen warned them that they were going too far and too fast. Local politicians demanded fairness for states' interests, and architects of compromise set their ideas aside. Nothing is more fatal to theoretical purity, than the spirit of compromise. The convention made a vitally important shift from devising the best constitution possible in theory to devising the best that had a chance to be adopted. What kind of constitution did this produce? The Constitution creates a government of three branches with limited but generous grants of power to operate directly on the individual citizens. The House of Representatives represents the people, and each state has equal representation in the state. The president is elected indirectly by an electoral college mixing national and federal elements. His powers, largely undefined, strike a balance between the good example of George Washington and the bad example of George III. The Constitution leaves the federal judiciary structure to Congress. Although it includes compromise clause dealing with slavery, the words slavery and slave appear nowhere in the document because the framers hoped that future generations would find a solution to slavery or that slavery would die out. I'm going to read that again because that is incredibly important. Although it includes compromise clause dealing with slavery, the words slavery and slave appear nowhere in the document because the framers hoped that future generations would find a solution to slavery or that slavery would die out. The amending process codified Article 5 is easier to work with than was Article 13 of the Articles of the Confederation. And Article 6, the Supremacy Clause, makes the Constitution the supreme law of the land and empowers federal courts to interpret it as part of their duties. Finally, because of fatigue and the belief, as Roger Sherman said, that it would be, quote, unnecessary, unquote, the original Constitution lacked a Bill of Rights. That turned out to be a fateful decision. Article 7 set forth the process for adopting the Constitution. Each state would elect a ratifying convention. If 9 of the 13 state conventions, 2/3 ratified it, it would go into effect as the new government of the United States. 2/3 was easier to achieve than a unanimous consent required by Article 13. Also, the ratifying conventions were more likely than the state legislators to consider the Constitution on its merits. The legislators, jealous of their power, would resist any attempt to shift power to the general government. Finally, because the Constitution would be the government of the American people, only they, not the states, had the power to form such a government. On 26 through 28 September 1787, the Confederation Congress debated the Constitution. Its opponents failed to persuade Congress to rewrite it or reject it as exceeding the convention's power, and its supporters failed to get Congress to endorse it. Instead, Congress silently forwarded the Constitution to the states, thus implying that the Constitution was legitimate. The ratification controversy was the supreme display of American political creativity. It opened on two interacting levels. On the former level, the Confederation Congress sent the Constitution to the state legislators, which called elections for ratifying conventions, which deliberated on ratifying the Constitution. On the informal level, a vigorous argument over the Constitution raged through the nation in the newspapers, pamphlets, broadsides, and rallies. The informal argument may have been the more important level, for it launched American constitutional discourse, the ongoing shared argument among the people about the Constitution's origins, significance, meaning, and applications, and helped to create a national political community focusing on people's attention on the political element of their national identity. Who supported the Constitution under the name Federalist? Who opposed it, known to posterity as anti-federalist? Some scholars argue that rich people tended to support the Constitution and poor or working class people tended to oppose it, or that city dwellers supported the Constitution and farmers opposed it. But these distinctions fail. Modern scholars suggest that the national issue of ratification interacted in each state with pre-existing divisions of state politics to produce a crazy quilt of shifting alliances and loyalties. They focus on tracking links between anti-federalist and federalist understandings of politics and society and their positions on the Constitution. Anti-federalists insisted that the convention exceeded its mandate by writing a new constitution instead of revising the articles. Federalists retorted that Congress and the states had accepted the Constitution's legitimacy, thus the issue was moot. Also, in the Federalist number 40, Madison invoked the right of revolution in the Declaration of Independence. He pointed out that a government too weak to safeguard the revolution was as threatening to liberty as a government that might be too strong. Second, two sides disagreed on the nature of the Union and the relationship between the Union and the states. Anti-federalists feared that the general government would swallow up the states, destroying the people's right of self-government. Federalists, citing the history of the Constitution, of the Confederation, insisted that the states would infringe on the general government's powers as they had with the Confederation. Also, they argued that only a government at least as strong as that outlined in the Constitution could protect the general good and the people's liberties. Otherwise, the Union would break into separate confederacies, which some Federalists charged was what Anti-Federalists had in mind. Denying that they wanted to break up the Union, Anti-Federalists insisted that even if the Confederation was too weak to safeguard American interests, the Constitution was still too dangerous. Third, Anti-Federalists denounced the Constitution system of representation as inadequate. They mocked the House of Representatives and the Senate as too small by comparison with the large state legislators. They argued that this unjust scheme of representation would limit service in Congress to powerful, wealthy men. Funny, we have powerful, wealthy men in Congress right now. Go figure. Federalists retorted that the Constitution scheme of representation was designed to choose men of enlarged views who could grasp the nation's interest. Moreover, reappointment would expand the House beyond its original size. Finally, Congress's powers were limited to avoiding infringing the people's rights and the state's legitimate powers, yet excessive enough to safeguard the general good. Anti-Federalists, distrusting the presidency, charged that the president was not accountable, that impeachment was too difficult to use against him, and that he would work to ensure his repeated re-election for life. Federalists reported that the president would be accountable because he could not hide behind advisors, that his brief term of office would not make him king, and that the Electoral College would choose the best man for the job. No president is made to be king. But they also made the mistake of thinking that the Electoral College would choose the quote-unquote best man for the job. Anti-Federalists denounced federal courts as unnecessary and expensive. They worried that federal courts would swallow up state courts, wiping out distinctions between state laws and leaving the people subject to a tyrannous federal branch. They also decried the lack of trial by jury in civil cases. In response, Federalists justified the federal judiciary as a bulwark of liberty that would defend the Constitution against unconstitutional acts of the national legislature or executive and vindicate the Constitution and the general government against encroachments by the states. Anti-Federalists found the Constitution's lack of a Bill of Rights their most powerful argument. Even many who backed the Constitution objected to its lack of a Bill of Rights. Jefferson scolded Madison, "A Bill of Rights is what people are entitled to against every government on earth, and no just government should refuse or rest on interference." Federalists argued that the Bill of Rights was not needed because the Constitution gave the federal government no power over rights. They also noted, as Hamilton insisted in the Federalist number 84, that the Constitution itself was a Bill of Rights. But aware that they were vulnerable on this issue, they began to rethink their position. Federalists praised the Constitution's amending process, Article 5. It would be easier to use than Article 13 of the Articles of Confederation, but it would bolster the Constitution as a fundamental law that should not be lightly altered. Article 5's blend of national and federal elements, as Madison noted in the Federalist number 39, proved that the Constitution would neither destroy the states nor be at their mercy. Other issues came up as well. Anti-Federalists objected to the clause authorizing a permanent capital, which would become the citadel where people's enemies would shelter themselves against the people's wrath. Federalists highlighted the humiliating journeys of the Continental and Confederation Congress from city to city during and after the Revolution. A new nation required the stability of a permanent capital. New England anti-federalists denounced the Constitution ban on religious tests for voting or holding office, spreading that a Jew, a Turk, or an infidel could become president. Federalists extolled this ban as a bulwark of religious liberty. Anti-Federalists in New England also denounced the Constitution's slavery clauses, but Southern Federalists praised them. The Constitution's amending process played a vital role in its victory. At the outset, some anti-federalists insisted that the Constitution had to be amended before they would accept it, drafting lists of previous amendments. Other anti-federalists were willing to adopt the Constitution, but only with added constitutional amendments. By contrast, the Federalists insisted that the Constitution had to be adopted or rejected without amendments. In February of 1788, the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention found a sensible compromise. Anti-Federalists would prepare a list of, quote, recommended amendments, unquote, to be sent to the Congress to meet under the Constitution, and Federalists pledged back such amendments. This device of recommended amendments became the key to the Constitution's victory. All states after Massachusetts, except Maryland, added lists of recommended amendments to their resolutions of ratification. These lists were the raw material from which Madison drew his list of proposed amendments that he ordered in the House of Representatives of the First Congress of 8 June 1789. 10 of those amendments were ratified in 1791, becoming the Bill of Rights. Number 4, constitutional change. Americans have shaped their lives through law, and for more than 200 years, the Constitution has been the core of the nation's law. We make many demands on the Constitution. It sets forth our government structure, allocates powers and duties among our public institutions and officials, and defines our rights and responsibilities. Just as important, the Constitution declares the nation's central principles, the goals for which we came together as a nation, the purpose of its grants of powers and limits on power, and the kinds of public and private lives that we want to foster under its protection. The Constitution changes over time in 3 major ways. The sweeping is formal constitutional change using Article 5's amendment process to add provisions to the Constitution. Formal constitutional change alters the document's form by a method of lawmaking more formal and difficult to use than ordinary lawmaking. To become a part of the Constitution, a proposed amendment must win a 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress and then be ratified by 3/4 of the states, 38 out of 50. More than 12,000 amendments have been proposed since 1789, but Congress has proposed only 33 to the states, and only 27 have been adopted. Constitutional amendments fall into one of 3 categories. The first group, such as the first 10 being the Bill of Rights, protect fundamental principles of liberty and self-government. Some, the Civil War amendments, 13, 14, 15, extend protections of liberty in ways either not imagined by the Constitution's framers and ratifiers or developing their efforts. The second group, such as that providing that senators be elected by each state's votes, so amendment number 17, or the Voting Rights Amendments, 15, 19, 23, 24, and 26 expands democracy as a core component of the constitutional system. And the third group, such as those dealing with the Electoral College, presidential terms of office, and presidential succession and disability, being amendments 12, 22, and 25, repairs defects of the original Constitution or responds to problems not envisioned by the Constitution's framers and ratifiers. The second way of changing the Constitution is judicial interpretation. Courts must apply the Constitution's provisions to changing times and circumstances. This is why Edmund Randolph, who prepared the first draft of the Constitution in August of 1787, wrote that he had to draft the Constitution in general terms. Such powerful phrases as commence among several states, freedom of speech, cruel and unusual punishment, and equal protection of the laws change meaning over time as new problems arise and people devise new responses to old problems. Each branch of the federal government and state and local officials must interpret the Constitution, but our system gives special weight to interpretations set forth by federal courts, especially the United States Supreme Court. Some of the pivotal moments of American history have come when the Supreme Court has had to interpret the Constitution to deal with a divisive issue or resolve a controversy between other branches of government. For example, in 1857, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney seized the opportunity to interpret the Constitution authoritatively to resolve issues concerning slavery. In Dred Scott v. Sanford, Taney ruled that the federal government had no power to limit slavery's spread into the territories. The public outcry over this decision helped to bring on the Civil War 4 years later. In 1954, in Brown v. Board of Education, the Justice Earl Warren declared for a unanimous Supreme Court that racial segregation violated the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Justice Dred Scott had been considered the low point of the judicial interpretation of the Constitution. Brown had long been considered a high point. And in 1974, the U.S. versus Nixon, Chief Justice Warren E. Burger ruled for a unanimous Supreme Court that President Richard Nixon had to obey a federal court's order to turn over tape recordings of private meetings with key aides as evidence in the Watergate investigations. This decision, upholding the principle of the rule of law against a sweeping claim of presidential authority, helped to force Nixon resign his office. And so now, as you know, the Supreme Court basically went and overturned that and gives a president nearly blanketed immunity, citing authoritative duties. So a good person to listen to about that one is going to be Elizabeth Booker Houston. I will tag her socials. She is an amazing, amazing lawyer who knows her shit and she knows the Constitution. So she would be a great person to learn more about the decisions that the U.S. Supreme Court has made in the recent years. Third, customs and usages grow up around the Constitution, helping to guide its day-by-day workings. Political parties are not mentioned in the Constitution, but they have become central to the workings of elected branches of government and to the conduct of elections. So too, federal courts recognize executive privilege, the principle that a president's confidential discussions with his aides should stay confidential in the most circumstances, but not as in United States v. Nixon, when records of those discussions may be essential to investigate alleged crimes. These three forms of constitutional change work together in a complex series of interactions, but they all help to maintain the American constitutional system's ability to respond to new circumstances and conditions. All written by R.B. Bernstein, Adjunct Professor of Law, New York School of Law, 2002. So our next video, we are just going to do a quick chronology of dates as far as the Constitution of the United States, and then we are going to get into reading the actual Constitution of the United States of America. And I hope that you guys will join me. Again, we will be doing this almost every day throughout the month of March and April. And again, if you have not picked up a copy of the United States Constitution, please do so. Please do so. You can download a PDF online, or you can go to your local bookstore or a Barnes & Noble to pick up a copy of the US Constitution. With everything going on in our country right now, especially with Trump and Elon Musk at the helm, it is absolutely imperative that every home, that every person have a copy of the US Constitution. Thank you for joining me, and we will be back tomorrow with more readings of the United States Constitution, including the Declaration of Independence.